My name is Darianne. For most of my life, I have been a student of systems. Not just the elegant, logical systems of code and logistics that I build for a living, but the unspoken human systems of power, influence, and recognition. I learned early that these systems are rarely fair. They are often opaque, governed by rules that are felt but never written down. For years, I believed the only way to navigate them was with quiet confidence, to do the work so well that the system would have no choice but to acknowledge it. I have since learned that a system designed to overlook you will never spontaneously develop sight. It must be taught to see. I live in a city of steel and glass that reflects a perpetually overcast sky, a place where ambition is the common currency and silence is often mistaken for weakness. My apartment is a small, quiet space filled with books on orbital mechanics and architectural theory, a sanctuary from the noise of the world. It is where I retreat to think, to build, and, as it turned out, to plan a revolution that began not with a bang, but with the soft click of a single keystroke. This is the story of how I stopped waiting for a seat at the table and decided to build a new one with a foundation of integrity, a blueprint of respect, and enough room for everyone who had ever been told to wait outside. The champagne flutes glittered under the soft ballroom lighting, and the string quartet played a vague, classical tune meant to sound expensive. The air buzzed with the artificial excitement that comes from forced smiles and canned applause. I stood at the threshold of the conference hall, a leather-bound presentation folder tucked tightly under my arm, watching as my colleagues filed inside. They moved in clusters, laughing and adjusting their name tags, their paths flowing around me as if I were a rock in a stream. Just as I stepped forward to find my place, Ranata Vale, our marketing director, materialized before me. Her smile was a perfect, icy curve, and she clutched a clipboard to her chest like a shield. "Dear Anne," she said, her voice coated in the syrupy, condescending tone people use when they are about to deliver a blow with a velvet glove. I flinched internally at the name. I'd been at the company for 3 years. "My name is Darianne. You can wait outside," she finished, her eyes flicking over my shoulder as if searching for someone more important. The words, though softly spoken, sliced through the air like cold steel. For a moment, the sound of the quartet faded, and I could hear only the rushing of blood in my ears. I thought I must have misheard her. I blinked, my gaze shifting to the check-in table behind her, where pristine name tags were being handed out. Mine was not among them. "I was told I was confirmed for the internal seating," I said, my voice quiet but clear, betraying none of the sudden hollowness in my chest. "We're at capacity," Ranata replied, her smile not wavering. She still wasn't looking at me, her attention fixed on the growing crowd. "You understand, right?" I looked past her into the vast, half-empty ballroom. The room was spacious, well under any fire code limits. Every department was represented. I spotted the entire operations team at a large, round table near the stage. And there, at the head of that table, sat Jordan Alden, proudly adjusting his tie. Jordan, the intern who had been with our company for less than 2 months. The intern who, just last week, had presented my logistics model, rebranded and simplified, as his own. He caught someone's eye across the room and raised his glass in a toast. A toast I was not invited to. "You're not on the list," Ranata said again, her patience thinning. Her smile sharpened at the edges. "It's for award nominees and their teams. We had to prioritize." The unspoken words hung in the air between us. "You are not a priority. You are not part of the team. You are not here." I said nothing. I looked at her, truly looked at her, for a long, silent moment. I saw not a villain, but a functionary of the system, a gatekeeper whose own position depended on enforcing the invisible hierarchy. In that moment, something inside me settled. It wasn't anger that rose up, but a profound and peaceful clarity. The quiet work, the patient waiting, the belief that merit would eventually be recognized, it was all a fantasy I had told myself. The system wasn't broken, it was working exactly as designed. I took a deliberate step back. I placed the useless presentation folder on a nearby side table with a soft thud. Then I opened my laptop. The hotel's Wi-Fi connected instantly. My fingers moved with practiced calm, hovering over the message I had queued earlier that morning, a draft I had written and rewritten in the quiet hours before dawn. The subject line read, "Notification of transition." I pressed send. Then I looked up and met Renata's impatient gaze. "You might want to check your email," I said, my voice even. I walked away before she could respond. As I turned, I heard the first faint ding of an incoming notification from inside the ballroom. Then another. Then a ripple of electronic alerts spread through the room like a virus. Chairs scraped against the polished floor. Voices rose in pitch, confusion turning to alarm. I didn't look back. I walked toward the grand, marbled lobby, my steps measured and sure. By the time I stepped into the gleaming brass elevator, the CEO's name had already lit up on my phone screen. I let it ring. The doors slid shut, reflecting my calm, composed face, and as the elevator descended, I felt not an ounce of regret. Only the quiet, exhilarating freedom of a system I had just rendered obsolete. 3 years ago, I joined Navisin as a senior operations analyst. I didn't arrive with a grand announcement or a flurry of LinkedIn posts. I came in quietly with 2 master's degrees, a near-eidetic memory for data patterns, and a deep, almost spiritual obsession with making systems work beautifully. I believe that elegance is the ultimate form of efficiency. Within my first 6 months, I had rebuilt the company's fulfillment dashboard from the ground up. It was a tangled mess of legacy code and manual inputs, prone to cascading errors. My new version was clean, intuitive, and automated, reducing manual data entry errors by 42%. A year later, I designed a predictive inventory tool using a proprietary algorithm that cut spoilage and waste across 3 of our largest distribution regions. I never asked for credit. I never sent the triumphant, "Look what I did" email. I naively believed that the results would speak for themselves, that the work would be its own advocate. Every quarter, the executive team sent out internal bulletins celebrating employee achievements, Team of the Month, Top Innovator, Impact Spotlight. My work was often featured. The predictive inventory tool won the Q3 Innovation Prize. The new dashboard was the centerpiece of a presentation on operational excellence. But my name never appeared alongside it. It was always Clive, my manager, who stood on the stage, accepting the accolades. I was the one who built the presentations he used, who crafted the talking points, who ran the numbers that made him look like a visionary. At first, I justified it. He's the manager, I told myself. It's his job to represent the team. I thought that perhaps next time, when the board saw the year-end savings reports, they would ask who was behind the numbers. I thought that when we landed the new European shipping partner, a deal made possible only by my route optimization formula, my contribution would be acknowledged. But nothing ever changed. The system of silent extraction continued, smooth and unopposed. The first time I tried to address it, I approached it as a problem to be solved, a flaw in the system to be corrected. I scheduled a meeting with Alina from Human Resources. I wasn't angry, just curious. I presented the issue calmly, with data points and examples. Alina barely looked up from her screen as I spoke. "Did you build these tools during your standard contracted hours?" she asked, her tone bored. "Well, yes, for the most part," I said. "Some of it was on my own time, refining the models, but the core work was done here." "Then technically, they are the intellectual property of the company," she said with a sigh, as if I were a child who didn't understand the rules of the playground. "Attribution is at the discretion of management. Clive is your manager. He presents the work of his department. Even if someone else is presenting it as their own?" I pressed gently. "Even when it's presented as a solo achievement?" She finally looked at me, her eyes devoid of empathy. "We can't mediate perception, Darian. My advice is to focus on your performance metrics. The system tracks your output. That's what really matters." Her words were meant to placate, but they were a revelation. The system didn't care about truth or fairness. It only cared about plausible deniability and maintaining the existing power structure. From that day on, my approach changed. I stopped offering up my best ideas in team meetings. I stopped sharing early drafts of my work. I began to build parallel versions of my systems on my personal computer during my own time. I started documenting everything with a quiet, meticulous rigor: draft timestamps, file hashes, detailed version histories. I was no longer just building systems, I was building a case. 6 months ago, I finished what I knew would be the most impactful contribution of my career, a multi-phase forecasting model for our clients' complex inventory cycles. It was a beautiful piece of work, a dynamic and scalable solution that could adapt to market shocks in real time. It could revolutionize our entire logistics strategy. I had poured hundreds of my own hours into it, spending weekends refining the algorithms, mapping edge cases, and stress testing the architecture. It wasn't just a tool, it was an insight into the future of our industry. I handed the polished framework to Clive, complete with annotated slides and internal test results, ready to present it at the upcoming strategic planning session. He glanced at the cover page, his expression non-committal. "Great," he said. Leadership has a very full agenda for that session, so to save time, I'll present the key points on your behalf. I hesitated, a familiar cold dread creeping into my stomach. Clive, I'd really prefer to walk them through the logic myself. There are some nuances. He cut me off with a placating smile. Don't worry, I'll be sure to credit your contribution. He didn't. At the meeting, he rushed through a shallow, 2-minute overview that stripped the framework of its elegance and power. He touched on none of the core logic. Needs further evaluation and a more user-friendly interface, he concluded flatly. The initiative was unceremoniously shelved. 3 weeks later, during a product pipeline review, Jordan Alden, the new intern from a prestigious business school, unveiled a new logistics optimization plan. He called it Quantum Sync. The room buzzed with excitement as he clicked through his slick, professionally designed slides. It was my framework. The architecture, the logic flow, the tiered rollout sequence, it was all there. The only things that had changed were the aesthetics and the name. Jordan smiled like a golden retriever who had just discovered fire, soaking in the praise from the executives. Clive sat beside him, hands folded, his eyes sparkling with pride. They hadn't just stolen my work, they had staged its reemergence in a more palatable package, delivered by someone younger, louder, and less threatening than the quiet woman who had actually built it. That night, I sat in my silent apartment and opened both versions side by side on my monitor. Mine, precise, sober, dense with information. His, rebranded, sanitized, but structurally identical. I stared at the screen, not in shock, but in a state of profound stillness. The emotional response I expected, rage, despair, indignation, never came. In its place was a quiet, cold resolve. I could have screamed. I could have forwarded the version history to the CTO. I could have exposed Clive and Jordan in a fiery, all-company email and watched the ensuing chaos. But I didn't want a temporary victory. I didn't want them to contain the damage. I wanted to build something so superior, so undeniable, that their entire system would collapse under the weight of its own obsolescence. So I did what I do best. I started to build. My plan wasn't a rebellion. It was an exodus. I called the new project Atlas Vault. It was conceived in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, a real-time SaaS logistics engine designed not just to outperform Navision's creaking infrastructure, but to expose its fundamental flaws. Atlas Vault could process route recalibrations 4 times faster than their system, dynamically adjust inventory forecasts in response to real-time demand shocks, and run full error tradebacks in under 15 seconds. It was everything I knew our clients needed and everything Navision was incapable of delivering. I worked in silence, on my own personal machines, never using corporate Wi-Fi or shared tools. Every line of code was annotated, every update version locked. I kept encrypted backups on multiple drives, with physical logs stored in a climate-controlled storage unit under my name only. If anyone ever tried to challenge the origin story of Atlas Vault, they would be buried under a mountain of indisputable, time-stamped evidence. But I knew that even the most elegant code was useless without the right people to wield it. A tool is only as good as the artisan. So I began to make a list. Not of allies, but of architects. People like me, the quiet giants who had carried the weight of the company on their shoulders, only to be erased from the blueprints. My first call was to Maribel Kuss. A brilliant product lead, she had built an automation prototype 2 years ago that could have saved the company millions. The project was mysteriously shelved for budgetary reasons, only for Clive to demo a strikingly similar concept 3 months later. Maribel had left the company shortly after, burned out and disillusioned. She was now running small, independent training seminars, her talent languishing in obscurity. We met for coffee in a small, out-of-the-way cafe. I didn't pitch her a startup. I didn't talk about revenge. I simply opened my laptop and showed her the architecture of Atlas Vault. I walked her through the clean code, the intuitive interface, the transparent reporting features. She watched in silence, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she stared into her empty cup for a long moment. He told me my prototype was too complex for the current market, she said softly. Then she looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the fire I knew she possessed. When do we start? Next, I contacted Theo Langdon. Theo was once our highest-rated client strategist, a man who possessed a rare gift for building genuine, lasting relationships. He had developed a client retention strategy that was credited with saving 3 major accounts during an acquisition year. The VP of Sales took full credit for it in the annual report. Theo was quietly dismissed 6 months later during a departmental restructuring. He was never bitter, just profoundly weary. I found him managing a small independent bookstore, surrounded by the quiet company of stories. I told him what I was building. I explained that Atlas Vault was designed with a client-side dashboard that offered unprecedented transparency and control. We're not just selling a service, I told him. We're building a partnership based on trust. No black boxes. No empty promises. Theo listened, his gentle eyes searching my face. A company that operates without politics, he murmured, a sad, wistful smile touching his lips. You're not just building a platform, Darian. You're building a philosophy. He said yes before I even had a chance to ask. Our team grew slowly, deliberately. We were not a startup, we were a trust circle. Word of what we were doing traveled through quiet channels, from one disillusioned professional to another. Theo introduced me to Dalia Reyes, a former compliance analyst who had been a rising star at Navison. She had uncovered a significant billing discrepancy involving overcharges on state-level contracts. She reported it through the proper internal channels. A few weeks later, her position was eliminated. Her replacement, a junior hire with no legal background, quietly removed the flagged reports from the system. Dalia was precise, methodical, and had zero tolerance for illusions. When I showed her the security framework for Atlas Vault, with its embedded compliance flags, immutable real-time audit trails, and zero room for discretionary overrides, she smiled for the first time in our entire conversation. This isn't just good, she said, her voice sharp with approval. This is righteous. She didn't need convincing, she needed a mission. We never met in groups larger than 3. Our work was conducted through encrypted channels and discreet meetings disguised as freelance consulting gigs. Our plan wasn't about a dramatic, fiery rebellion. It was about momentum. If we launched simultaneously, if we all moved together, Navison wouldn't have time to react. The clients, faced with a superior alternative and the sudden departure of their key contacts, wouldn't wait around for explanations. We mapped everything: key client dependencies, operational bottlenecks, internal communication chains. Dalia calculated the exact number of simultaneous departures needed to trigger a cascade failure in department-level continuity. The number was 8. If 8 of us left on the same day, we wouldn't just be leaving a company. We would be shifting the center of gravity of our entire industry sector. But we still needed one more piece: real funding, robust infrastructure, and legal protection. That's when I reached out to Helena Grange, a venture capitalist with a formidable reputation for backing underdog teams with bulletproof execution plans. We met in a quiet corner of a private club near Union Square. I walked her through the core framework of Atlas Vault, the transition plan, and the non-compete loopholes Dalia had identified. She listened intently, her expression unreadable, asking sharp, insightful questions. She was quiet for a long time after my final slide. This could work, she said at last, her voice low and decisive. But only if you bring real business with you from day one. It can't be speculative. Can you promise me 5 major clients will sign letters of intent? I met her gaze without flinching. If I can't promise them, I said, I can make them ask the right questions of their current provider. The answers they get will be my promise. She leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. She folded her arms and gave a single, sharp nod. Bring me their questions. I'll bring the money. The countdown had begun. In the weeks that followed, I began a delicate, carefully orchestrated dance. I started with the clients I knew best, not just as accounts, but as people. The operations managers who had stayed on late-night calls with me to fix routing bugs Clive had ignored. The logistics coordinators who were frustrated by the same system failures that frustrated me. I didn't pitch them anything. That would have been a breach of my contract. Instead, I asked questions. How's the system response time been for you lately? Still having to manually override the inventory triggers. Did you ever get that dashboard update we discussed last year? I was just looking at the latest freight cost projections. Are you seeing the same friction on your end? They told me what I already knew. They spoke of delays, of a lack of transparency, of promises made in sales decks that the current system couldn't possibly keep. Then and only then would I show them a small glimpse of what I was building. Not the full platform, just a single widget. A real-time shipment allocation tool that updated in less than 5 seconds. A clean, simple interface with client-side controls. No sales fluff. Just a system that worked. One by one, they leaned in, their eyes widening with interest. If you ever build this for real, one of them said, you call me first. Another added, let me know when there's a beta I can test. We need this yesterday. I didn't ask for contracts. I asked for their honest feedback, and I documented every reply. Dalia then drafted provisional service agreements, designed to activate only upon our formal launch. They were non-binding, legally airtight, but they were real. The patents for Atlas Vault were filed under a neutral LLC I had registered months prior, Paragranops. Helena released the first round of funding the day the fifth letter of intent crossed her legal team's desk. It wasn't a massive sum, but it was enough. Enough for a small, configurable office space in a quiet industrial lot. Enough to pre-wire the servers. Enough to lock in our software licenses. Enough to move. We painted the walls of our new office ourselves on a Saturday morning. There was music and pizza, and for the first time in a long time, laughter. As I looked around at the faces of my team, Maribel, Theo, Dalia, and the others who had quietly joined our cause, I felt a profound sense of peace. No one said it out loud, but we all knew it. This was home. The structure was solid. The people were ready. The product worked. The only variable I couldn't predict was the human element of the collapse we were about to trigger. The morning of the awards gala, I dressed with deliberate care. A slate gray jacket, a simple navy dress, low heels, a clean, sharp, professional uniform. The kind of outfit that didn't scream for attention, but refused to be invisible. I arrived 15 minutes before the program began, my laptop in one hand, the leather presentation folder in the other, props for the final act of my career at Navison. The ballroom doors were wide open. The stage was brightly lit. On the large screen behind the podium, a rotating slideshow of honorees paused on a smiling picture of Jordan Alden. The text beneath it read, Innovation Award winner, Jordan Alden for Quantum Sync Logistics Suite. A total, unadulterated farce. I made it 3 steps past the check-in table before Ranata intercepted me, her smile as brittle as spun sugar. I'm so sorry, Darianne, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. It's nominees only past this point. I nodded, feigning mild surprise. Of course. I stepped aside, opened my laptop, and connected to the network. It was a custom hotspot I'd embedded into the venue's guest Wi-Fi router the night before, a small, elegant touch of poetic justice. I opened the email draft I had finalized at 2:43 a.m., double-checked the list of recipients, the entire executive board, all of Navison's major clients, and a curated list of industry journalists, and confirmed the attached documents were in order. Then, with a steady hand, I clicked send. I stood for a moment longer, watching the emails cascade out into the world. Then I closed the laptop, slipped it into my bag, and turned to leave, just as the first notifications began to chime inside the ballroom. The first call came before the elevator doors had fully closed. The CEO. The second was Clive. The third was an automated summons from HR requesting an urgent dialogue. I silenced my phone and let it vibrate against the leather of my bag, a frantic, desperate buzzing. By the time I reached my car in the cavernous parking garage, the notifications had escalated. Emails marked with red exclamation points from corporate communications, legal counsel, and the head of procurement. They all wanted the same thing, a conversation, a clarification, a delay. But it was already too late. The system was in motion. 45 minutes later, as I sat in the quiet of my own apartment, a different kind of call began to come in. It was Theo, his voice alight with an energy I hadn't heard in years. They're panicking, he said. The clients are calling them. Not for clarification, Darianne. For their release clauses. My exit email had been a model of professional restraint. It announced my resignation and the launch of Paragranops. But it also contained attachments, the provisional letters of intent from 5 of their key clients, and a meticulously documented side-by-side comparison of my original framework and the Quantum Sync presentation, complete with timestamps. According to Theo's contact still inside, Clive had turned on Jordan within minutes of the email landing, claiming the intern had acted independently and that he had no idea the framework had been plagiarized. It was a laughable, desperate lie. Navison's legal team quickly discovered that the patents for Atlas Vault had been filed months earlier, under a different corporate entity. Dalia's work was flawless. An internal leak, forwarded to me by an anonymous admirer in the IT department, showed a Slack channel descending into chaos. The question, is Darianne's departure for real, was answered with a screenshot of the press release we had scheduled, which had just gone live on a major industry wire service. Then came a twist I hadn't anticipated. An email from a client I respected deeply, the head of logistics for a major European retailer. The subject line read, appreciation. The message was brief. Thank you for building what we have actually been needing for years. As a gesture of goodwill, I've attached some internal documentation showing that your original version of the framework was circulated and then intentionally buried by your management. I thought you might want this. You deserve to own your own story. I stared at the attachment. It was an internal report. My original logic tree, my digital watermark, my revision dates, all there, with a memo from Clive recommending it be shelved for future review. I downloaded the file, saved it to the vault, and locked my phone, a profound sense of validation washing over me. Just as I was about to make a celebratory cup of tea, a noise from the street below caught my attention. A car had pulled up, and someone was shouting my name. Darian. Wait. I went to the window. His voice echoed between the brick buildings. I recognized him immediately. Vincent Harrow, the company's vice president of operations. I watched as he got out of his car and strode toward my building's entrance. Moments later, my intercom buzzed. I hesitated, then pressed the button. We need to talk, he said, his voice strained. I let him come up. He stood in my doorway, his tie askew, his face pale. He looked nothing like the polished, untouchable executive who floated through boardrooms. We'll match any offer, he said, without preamble. Salary, equity, a new title. Chief of Innovation. Whatever you want. Your terms. I raised an eyebrow. An hour ago, I wasn't worth a seat at your awards dinner. Now I'm worth an entire division. He had the grace to look ashamed. That was an oversight, Darian. A terrible mistake. You know how these things go. I folded my arms. Do I? He hesitated, then took a step into my apartment, lowering his voice. Look, the board, they were aware of some of the dynamics. Clive, Jordan, the misattributed work. They felt that managing it quietly was safer than risking public friction. Safer, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. For whom, Vincent? He didn't answer. And there it was. The final, damning piece of truth. The gaslighting hadn't been an accident or an oversight. It had been policy. A quiet, strategic siphoning of value from the people they thought were least likely to fight back. Not a flaw in the system. A feature. Vincent ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure desperation. The company can't survive this kind of disruption. What you're doing, it's not too late to come back. We can make it right. I smiled then, a small, sad smile. You've already shown me exactly who you are, Vincent. You've taught me a valuable lesson. Value isn't nurtured at Navison. It's extracted. He stepped closer, his expression pleading. Don't do this out of spite. You're better than that. This was never about spite, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It's about clarity. It's about building something that is honest, from the foundation up. I opened the door for him. You should go now. You have a company to save. The last thing I saw was his shrinking reflection in the polished elevator doors as they closed, leaving me alone in the quiet of my new beginning. 3 months later, Atlas Vault was no longer a ripple. It was a wave. We had 19 major clients, including 3 that had once formed the backbone of Navison's quarterly reports. Our series of funding round closed at double our projected valuation. Helena's firm expanded their stake, and every member of our founding team, all 8 of us, received significant equity. Our office, the refurbished freight hub, was a vibrant ecosystem of collaboration. We had floor-to-ceiling whiteboards covered in algorithms and ideas. There were no private executive suites. My desk was in the center of the open concept space, across from Dalia, who was now our chief compliance officer. Theo, our head of client strategy, laughed more than I had ever heard him laugh before. Maribel was building a product development team of young, brilliant engineers who adored her. Navison, meanwhile, was floundering. Their stock had fallen by 38%. Industry blogs dissected their sudden and catastrophic loss of institutional expertise. Clive had resigned to pursue other ventures. Jordan had been quietly moved to a non-client-facing department in another city. One afternoon, my assistant informed me that Vincent Harrow was in our lobby, requesting a meeting. I was tempted to refuse, but curiosity won out. He sat across from me in one of our simple conference rooms, a thick, glossy folder on the table between us. The offer was for a full acquisition. The number was staggering. He spoke of synergy and integration and a fresh start. When he was finished, I didn't even look at the numbers. I gently slid the folder back across the table toward him. I built this table, Vincent, I said quietly. I'm not interested in selling my seat. That week, I delivered the keynote address at the National Supply Chain Summit. I stood on a brightly lit stage under a single spotlight, looking out at a sea of faces, some of whom had once dismissed me, some of whom had never seen me at all. I began my speech with a simple sentence. They told me to wait outside, I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. So I built my own door. A hush fell over the room. It wasn't applause, not yet. It was something more potent. It was the sound of 1,000 people listening. I spoke for 20 minutes, not about revenge, but about architecture. About how systems, both technical and human, can fail when they become rigid and dishonest. And about how new systems can rise when they are built on a foundation of transparency, respect, and a belief in the quiet power of work that is simply, elegantly, and undeniably good. And this time, they saw me.